Hello and welcome, and thank you for coming. We continue the North Seattle College Art Gallery's virtual visiting artist lecture series today. We started it in the fall of 2020, and today we have a lecture by Kelda Martinson. I am Amanda Knowles, the coordinator of the NSC Art Gallery and printmaking and drawing instructor in the art department at North Seattle College. I'm pleased to work with Karen Stoldreyer, who assists in the gallery, does a lot of work on social media, and is assisting behind the scenes here today, letting you all in. We have live transcript available for those of you who want it. Those of you who don't want it or find it distracting, you can turn it off by clicking the live transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and selecting hide subtitle. Use it if you wish, hide it if you wish, but we want to be sure that we have it for those that need it. First, some acknowledgements, and I will share my screen. First is the land acknowledgement. North Seattle College acknowledges that we occupy the lands of the Coast Salish peoples, the descendants of the first peoples of this region, a people whose cultures endure and are valued. Without this land and these cultures, we would not have access to this gathering, dialogue, and learning space. We take this moment to honor and thank the original caretakers of this land, their ancestors, and their descendants who are still here. We encourage participants here today to consider our responsibilities as we stand in solidarity with the sovereignty, cultural heritage, and lives of Native, Indigenous, and First Nations people. And then the labor acknowledgement. We also pause to recognize and acknowledge the labor that created the United States and from which we all benefit. We remember that our nation is built on the labor of enslaved people who were forcibly brought to the US from the African continent, and we recognize the continued contribution of their survivors. We acknowledge immigrant labor and recognize that voluntary forced and prison labor contribute to the building and ongoing maintenance of our nation. We acknowledge all unpaid caregiving labor. Additionally, we acknowledge the critical importance of the work towards racial equity that continues across this country and the world in response to racial injustice and generations of structural racism against BIPOC communities. The third slide is what we are doing to continue to work to go from acknowledgement to deed. We know that it is not enough to just acknowledge the land and labor and have to be sure that we're taking action. We show you here what actions North Seattle College and the NSC Art Department are taking to support BIPOC individuals and institutions and to be held accountable. We recommend Real Rent Duwamish, and we will put that link in the chat for you all to explore. Okay, thank you. This is the last week of Extracurricular 3, which is the faculty show that is up in the NSC Art Gallery currently. If you go, you can see 3 large prints and an artist book by Kelda, as well as artwork of all of the instructors in the NSC Art Department. The gallery will be open Monday through Thursday, 11 to 4 p.m. through this Thursday, April 28th. We continue to mandate the campus wellness check-in, as well as the wearing of masks. The next exhibition in the gallery will be the annual student show, which opens on Monday, May 16th, and we're really excited about that. We will also continue to have virtual visiting artist lectures. Today is the first of 2 that we have planned this quarter. On Monday, May 20th, we will have artist Jacob Reyes speaking with us. Please keep checking in with the gallery on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website to find out who will be talking and when. We urge you to visit our website for links to recordings of all the talks to date, as well as the list of upcoming visiting artists. We will post our links in the chat. Thank you. And with that, it is time to introduce you to our visiting artist, Kelda Martinson. And what a pleasure it is to be able to share Kelda and her work with you today. Kelda Martinson earned a Bachelor of Art degree in studio art from Willamette University and a Master of Fine Arts degree in visual art from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. She is a visual artist who works in printmaking, collage, book arts, as well as murals. Among others, her awards include the Sustainable Arts Foundation Individual Artist Award, Bell Kramer Award in printmaking, and the Conceptual Visionary Award from Pratt Fine Arts Center. She has held residencies at Cahoots in Petaluma, California. Have you done that one already, or is it coming up? Coming up, okay. Pine Meadow Ranch in Sisters, Oregon, Pratt Fine Arts Center here in Seattle, and Cité Internationale des Arts in Paris, France. Her prints and artist books are in private and public collections, including the Microsoft Art Collection, Google Art Collection, King County Portable Works Collection, City of Tacoma Art Collections, Nancy Spiritus Kranzberg Studio for the Illustrated Book, among others. Since 2012, Kelda has taught in the art department here at North Seattle College, where she is tenured faculty. Her teaching awards include the Dan Evans Innovation in Teaching Award, the John and Sue Ann Rochette Excellence Award, and Association of Women Faculty Graduate Award. She has participated in many group and solo exhibitions and print portfolios around the country. With Paula Rebsam, she recently co-curated an exhibition entitled Always On, Art and Motherhood. She is represented by J. Reinhardt Gallery here in Seattle, where in 2021, she mounted a beautiful show entitled Familiar Reasons to Let Go. I have known Kelda for years. Whether a small sketch, I can't get that one of the polar bear out of my mind, tiny temporary collage, or a large public mural, her art is rich, poetic, and thoughtful. The titles touch the live wire that connects us and makes us look deeper. She is a caring and helpful colleague and a fabulous teacher. I will hand you over to Kelda, but before I do, I want to let the audience know that we will be taking questions in the chat today. So if questions or comments arise during the talk, please write them in the chat and we will hopefully get to all of them. As usual, we will be sending a transcript of the chat to Kelda after the talk. So if you want to comment on work and her words, please do, but you might be specific about what you're commenting on, as she will see your words after the talk, just so she's not distracted. But I urge you to support her, her ideas and her work in the chat. Welcome virtually here, and thank you so much for coming to speak with us, Kelda, from school.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you everyone for coming. It's really just such a pleasure to be in this space. These talks that you've organized through the last 2 years now, I think you pivoted so quickly to bringing it online, and they've just been such a bright spot. I've loved every single one. So I'm really, I'm really honored to be here. And it's just great to see you all. So what I will do, I decided to write most of my thoughts down because I am sort of coming from teaching one class and running to teaching another. So forgive me if I'm looking down, but just let me know if I miss anything in the chat that I should address, and I'd be happy to do that. So I'll start sharing. All right, so you know, often I find the way, sometimes even the only way I understand how to articulate my own impulses for making is through the words of others. And lately when I'm in the studio or commuting, I listen to interviews with authors and poets as sort of my main way that I feel connected to my own practice, is sort of within that context. So I wanted to share a few of these nuggets with you throughout the talk. This is a page from my sketchbook with a quote from Douglas Kearney, who's a phenomenal poet and performer. And Kearney performs his poetry, and to read it is to like really navigate a visual landscape on the page. He just wrote the book Show, for those of you interested, SHO. So in an interview I listened to recently, he said very matter-of-factly, you know, there are easier ways to get information than from a poem. So this may seem obvious or needless to say, but it really stuck with me because it was in response to the question of whether or not it's really the poet's job to convey information. But since it's not really always easy to read it or to interpret poetry, there must be another reason that we turn to it or to art than purely for information. And if it's not only for information, then I think it is something more to do with aura or with a feeling or something below the surface of knowing. And I think this must also be true of art and also true of artist talks, that we come for more than just information, but really to sit with another's way of thinking, another's influences, another's struggles, and to learn more about their process of moving through decisions. So that's what I was thinking today, that I would just meander through my very nonlinear way of thinking and hope to convey a few windows into what inspires me and what I'm thinking about when I'm making. I want to say right off the bat that when I sort of think about my work, quote unquote, I find more comfort in thinking about what may still be to come. I listened to a great artist talk by Deb Sokolow, if any of you know her, does some really hilarious sort of comic and architectural drawings, who starts off the presentation with her worst piece ever and says, you know, it's always good to start an artist talk with low expectations. It's just better for everyone that way. And so she's hilarious and far more accomplished and than I. So I feel like she can get away with it. But my version of that is to just sort of let you know that I'll be talking about existing work, but sometimes where I feel the most in tune with my practice is more in this sort of swelling mind space, more imaginative space that we as creative people have and spend a lot of time in. It's where I think the work is the most interesting. And it's an awkward thing to admit and to describe. And sometimes it feels a bit non-heroic to talk about it that way. But the reality is, as an artist, I really sort of function best in this space of parameters and knowing there could be more, you know, this headspace of what could be possible. And so as I'm working toward those ideas and dreaming, all along the way, work gets made and large projects happen. So in a way, this talk, I feel like it's about the work that is just sort of happening along the way and along the journey. And I'll kind of walk you through several of those years. Some days I feel like 95% of my art practice is dwelling in the work of others. And I like to call this research. So I think of influence, I think of it as a constant flowing like river that's always moving underneath us or beside us, moving through time and moving through cultures. And what we call research are the times we decide to really stop and try to collect that water from the river, like drink it with both hands, like get your balance and stop. You know, it takes a lot of attention and time to really do that. And you can't drink it all, right? Like you have to go on living your life and you have to let a lot of art and ideas pass you by. But the times that you really do stop to drink it in, I don't think you're ever the same. So I saw an artist book of Enrique Chagoyes. It was over 20 years ago now. But now I'm never not seeing this book, right? So every time I go to the studio, that work is with me. And I think we all have these encounters with art or with story where everything you make and do and think from then on is influenced by that encounter. About the same time that I first encountered Enrique Chagoyes' artist books and prints, I was living with a best friend who had spent a summer at Bread and Puppet Theater in Vermont. And she was making her own production. And she introduced me to the South African Handspring Puppet Company. And these photographs of their productions and the way they rendered emotion and scene and the live actors and the carved wood puppets really influenced my figurative work for years. And it was the Handspring Puppet Company that introduced me to William Kentridge because he partnered with them and worked with them on a lot of productions. And it was William Kentridge who changed how I think about and understand art making as an act of resistance and how I understand drawing to be collage and vice versa. These are Kentridge works that I'm showing you now. When I started grad school, I had very little experience and very little education in contemporary art. I could probably count on one hand the number of times I'd been to a museum or to a gallery. Just wasn't a part of my family's culture or really something that anyone I knew had access to or experience in. But I was raised around crafts and tradespeople, and I felt a deep, soulful connection to materials. So in school, I was just a sponge. It really felt like every single day I was having these encounters with artists that shaped my identity as an artist and a thinker. I remember sitting in the special collections library where my book arts teacher, Jana Harper, handed me an artist book of Jean Toumet's Cane, illustrated with woodblocks by Martin Purrier. It was a story I already knew as a paperback and owned, but to hold this artist book in my hand with these woodblocks was extraordinary and really life-changing, actually. Here I was touching a page that Martin Puryear himself, a master woodworker, who also made prints and woodblocks, who he himself had, the pages he had touched himself. And that connection through time is something I'll never forget. I was lucky that my grad school mentors could see in me this deeper, soulful connection to tools and materials. This is Elisa Bulowski, and they saw my work through that lens. Lisa Bulowski was one of those mentors. Her work has been highly influential. Her use of printmaking and collage and abstracted narrative directly impacts my work to this day. I made hundreds and hundreds of plates and images in grad school on everything from paper to copper to plastic to wood. And even though I didn't always know what I was making, I saw myself as akin to Nancy Sparrow, or at least this photograph of her, and knew if I just kept making things, I would soon amass a body of work and come to know myself as an artist through the materials that I was generating. So when I make work, it is with this ancestral line in mind, this current of all the artists and thinkers that are in my river of influence. I mentioned this soulful connection I feel with materials and tools. So I wanted to share a quote with you from Jory Graham, who is another poet I look to for how she articulates creative practice. I'm going to play an excerpt from the excellent literary podcast called Between the Covers, hosted by David Naiman. Each episode is over 2 hours, sometimes 3, in which the host and the author stay really, really attentive to the work and to the research and the levels of meaning in each novel or collection or whatever it is they're there to discuss. Yeah, I highly suggest listening. So this quote comes after a conversation they've been having for a good hour and a half or so around the use of tools and an Ainu belief that once a tool has been used for 100 years, it develops a soul and it knows the hands that use it. I want to play only a minute of this 3-hour-long conversation because I think it is helpful in understanding the conceptual importance that I give materials and technique in my work. And I want to play it in Jory Graham's own voice. It may sound a little tinny and distant, but I hope that you can hear it okay and let me know if not.
There's no doubt that something with human use, especially transmitted over the barrier of mortality. In other words, an object that's been used by ancestors, passed down, has a kind of aura, a kind of gravitas or weight, which is really the weight of time and the weight of the way human labor, effort, love, sacrifice, and the desire for accurate making, which a tool implies. And that's a big part of it. You know, if you just get close up to the experience of using a tool or any implement, what you feel is the astonishing decision between the mind, the heart, and the hands, the fingertips, to do a thing better, to do a thing differently, to do a thing more deeply, to carve more accurately, to invent, to suddenly discover, you know, to whether it's stone or wood or whatever implement you're using, there's a moment when you feel the grain of the thing.
So the way that she describes this decision-making between the heart and the hand and the mind to make a thing better, to make it more deeply, more accurately, and to this drive to communicate across time is something that really resonates with me as a reason I go to the studio and sort of what continues to bring me there and why I feel connected to the work. I also view this concept of intuition in this way, and Amanda and I have talked about this a lot actually, that it's less maybe a bodily experience where intuition or making without thinking, I think of it as less a bodily experience where your brain shuts off and the thing makes itself, but more a deeply practiced ability to make decisions quickly and to call upon years or generations worth of experience working with a tool or a material or a concept, so much so that it feels natural or intuitive, but is in fact the result of our inner and lived authority with our own work. And I think we could claim this knowledge in a different way sometimes. So to back up, this is where I spent my childhood. This is my dad's cabinet shop that I grew up in. It was steps from our back door, and the line from between his shop and our home was very blurred with sawdust. I spent every day in this space. I played with needle nose pliers as figurines. I drew on wood scrap more than I had paper or scrap paper in the house. My dad blew the sawdust off my dog's fur and our hair with an air compressor before we came in the house for dinner. My parents' social circle were all builders and subcontractors and tradespeople. So I really grew up believing that making a living with one's hands and making a living off of your creative ability was the norm. My choice to study art and to be an artist was really never questioned. And I would say it was even assumed that I would take this path. In graduate school, I took an excellent class co-taught by the architect Igor Marjanovic and former architect and now printmaker Ken Wood, called Between Drawing and Drafting. And I learned there about Tova Kadori and Rachel White-Reed. For the first time, it dawned on me how much I had been studying architectural drawing my entire life. I grew up looking over my dad's shoulders at blueprints, walking through stick frame houses. I could see now how flipping those huge blueprint drawings were my first exposure to artist books. In school, I came to love printmaking with a very mixed media interpretation, and though I learned the traditional methods of woodblock and etching and lithography, the resulting print was never quite finished to my mind. I always had a drive to manipulate and push the image into different depths. I got into graduate school on a portfolio of woodblocks and artist books that I had batiqued using wax and fabric dye. They were highly illustrative and pictorial and at times pretty literal. So these early grad school pieces you're seeing now come from that same interest in using wax and dye and collage to create layers or worlds within the work. I still have an interest in scenes, silhouetted figures, and mixed media printmaking that were there from my first encounters with Shigoya and Kentridge. But through learning and mentorship and exposure, I was starting to understand a bit more about nuance and abstraction, color and negative space to communicate atmosphere. I made books in middle school and high school, mostly as a way of dressing up reports, trying to get better grades off the presentation of the content alone. But when I started to dig into them more intellectually, I found that artist books were a really useful form for me, a useful structure in terms of how to organize my composition and give my prints physical dimension, in addition to the illusion of dimension. Layli Long Soldier, another poet who has influenced my understanding of craft, said something in an interview along the lines of, the content is pulled into the form. And I find this very helpful for understanding the relationship between the content, or what it is I'm trying to say, and the form, or the resulting object or image that you see. Maybe I just feel vindicated as someone who gives a lot of weight to technique and material, which has not always felt popular nor learned enough. But what is being said in my work, though more emotive than concrete and instructional, is really experienced and becomes more clear to the viewer when they are up close with the craft of the piece. This is an artist book that can be collapsed flat and printed. It's printed on both sides. It also stands as a paper sculpture that you can see here. This piece uses symmetry to refer back to the poem it is named after by Victor Hernandez Cruz, which reimagines Puerto Rico as if the colonizers reversed their course. This is a piece I'll be presenting at a printmaking conference in Puerto Rico next year. Amanda will be there, yes. As part of an exhibition I'm co-curating with Kamla Kakaria. I have been working with Moleskine journals for a long time as a jumping off point for exploring artist books and as a direct physical connection between note-taking, journaling, and artist books. My thesis and many pieces after started from altering these books, these like small journals. This piece, which is called To Make Your Dreams More Vivid, excuse the low resolution on it, I see now, was one of the first times I moved out of the Moleskine journal and onto the page to really explore that in-between space between book and print. What we talk about when we talk about coyotes also crosses this distance. And through the collage, I am exploring the negative space or what is not being said as interesting territory for giving the piece more meaning. There's another poet, Rosemary Waldrop, who talks about this as the gap gardening, or really attending to the spaces in between the page. And another interview I listened to with Victoria Chang, who talked about the negative space is really the only way we can read a word, right? If there was no negative spaces between our letters, it would be unintelligible to us. And so really attending to those spaces in between, the nooks and crannies where there isn't imagery, making the image. And I love that idea. So I'll pause here to give a little bit more background. My environment and the life context behind this work was that I was becoming a mother. I was pregnant with my first child when I made this piece, and it's called Let Me Down Easy. This piece, La Petite Cascade, was another rumination rather on the falling leaves and sort of this gentle landing. These were still large scale, time intensive works. But when I became a mother of two was when my relationship with my studio practice shifted so drastically that I became wholly dedicated to seeing smaller gestures as enough and as the practice itself. This new way of seeing art making really changed my practice. So I decided then, after the birth of my second daughter, Sonia, to take part in the open source social practice project started by Lenka Clayton called the Artist Residency in Motherhood. It is a self-directed residency, and how it manifests for each artist varies widely. For me, it was a very useful structure for giving these small and sometimes seemingly insignificant production in the studio a larger meaning and belonging in my canon of work. And this way of organizing and understanding my work really stays with me today, even though now it's been years. So I started a series I call Tiny Temporary Collages. They were often bits and scraps from my studio debris that I would overlap or collide or hold in proximity to one another. And I often just left them that way, unaltered and unadhered. I would take a picture with my phone and occasionally post it on Instagram. For me, this was all I could do to stay connected to my community of artists while I was teaching full-time and parenting off of little or no sleep. In some cases, I would commit to these temporary collages and would really try to figure them out and glue them down as I did with these three, titled Once, All Told, and Try to Enjoy It. These are all about motherhood, really, though are also sort of a playful exploration into pattern and textures of the found paper that I had generated in previous projects. And again, I hope the content gets pulled into the form with these. I remember looking at this piece on the right called Try to Enjoy It, again, when we were in a stay-at-home order for the pandemic. I was seeing artists make more work than they ever had, proclaiming a forced stay-at-home residency. But as a working parent, I never felt so busy and helpless and overwhelmed. So Try to Enjoy It became about this expectation that you have time just because you're home. We're in this together uses a failed project, a magazine I made and editioned, but it didn't work out for various reasons. So I then collaged on top of it and documented myself navigating it as an artist book. This same failed magazine has made its way into many projects and artist books, and most recently a zine edition that I'm finishing now. So when I say failed, please know I keep every last bit of it, and it will end up being in materials of future work and adding to the material language of works to come. Another author that I look to in terms of understanding my way of working is Borges, specifically the Borgesian way. He compacts really infinite stories and spaces, or really entire universes, into this limited frame of a few pages. He inspires many for the way that he does this, and he writes around themes of labyrinth and the library, and this idea that you may never find the same page twice, as in The Book of Sand, one of my favorite short stories by him. I do see my pieces as sort of short stories. Everything on the page relates to everything else. As an artist, you are tasked with making everything work together, yet also creating tension and mystery and presenting the whole story at once. I do work like a found object artist. I collect and search for material, but all the material I'm using, I have also made myself through my generative printmaking, drawing, and collage practice. And in this way, my new work comes directly into conversation with existing work. Work made tomorrow might share the very same texture with work made over a decade ago. This piece, All I Can Do, is an example of how my tiny temporary collages leads into larger woodcut pieces. This is compiled from studio debris, cast-offs from previous prints, ink drawdowns, as the printmakers in the room will recognize. This collage was all about that specific moment in time. It was all I could do to keep my identity as an artist by documenting sometimes the only seconds spent in the studio. But then this same collage served as a compositional template for a larger woodcut, Peace Flag, which then went on to spur more work. Going back to the importance of wood grain, as Jory Graham was speaking to in her quote that I played earlier, I work with wood grain a lot. I consider it to be an autobiographical symbol just due to my upbringing and my family's culture. I work with wood as the starting point. I create a puzzle of wood shapes, sometimes the size of a full sheet of plywood, and then further shape and alter the wood itself. I then ink each piece of the puzzle separately and piece them back together in the press like a puzzle. One of the most alluring aspects of printmaking is that it is done out of sight. There's always part of it that's completely in the dark and that you can't access. I just listened to the full series of Mellon lectures by Jennifer Roberts, who really speaks about this so wonderfully. So I highly recommend those. For woodblock, that moment of darkness happens when it is in the blankets, moving through the press. There's no possible way to see what is happening while it is happening. You only witness your piece after it's been imprinted. So I'll play a little clip of this reveal, but the reason I'm sharing it is how cute my daughter's voice is.
Whoa, look at it, Mom. Look at on the thing.
She's just such a little cheerleader. She's like, whoa, look at it, Mom. So this piece, what I meant to say was another tiny temporary collage, very small, but you can kind of see this compositional, the way that these shapes are combined here in the lower right, end up resulting, and this is the piece that I pulled from the press in that video, but then it's been further collaged on. So the distance and the mystery of print is what makes it so intoxicating and addictive, really. You can't ever fully own it because it just doesn't feel like yours alone. You weren't even really there when it was made. So I think about my practice as a conversation between printmaking, or what happens in the dark, and then also collage, or what is happening in a fully illuminated and controlled space where you can make decisions and change the course of the piece instantaneously. I'll move now through more of my large scale woodcuts, some of which you can see in the extracurricular exhibition at the gallery now. Lava Rock Mountaintop was made in residence in Central Oregon and was made in direct response to the land. The rust color of the red rock in the high desert, the smoke of the skies during the forest fires, and a monumental shape of the mountains and the river canyons. This is the same piece that you saw in my sketchbook at the beginning, listening to Douglas Kearney. In all of this work, I am working towards the illusion of a deeper space on a two-dimensional plane, and I do this by focusing on edges and transitions between textures. I had a studio visit once. The artist Michael Byron said to me about my work, and this has stayed with me, reverberates loudly every time I'm in the studio. But when you are looking at a mirror, you are 6 inches from the mirror, but you are 12 inches from your own reflection. And this has stayed with me as a way of communicating that very visible but intangible container of space that I'm trying to create in my work. Sometimes it's a portal or a window. Other times it's a landscape that you can look through or over or in. In the last few years, I've been working with Jay Reinhardt Gallery in Seattle, and this is an installation shot of the show that Amanda mentioned that opened in January of 21. I wanted to show how these pieces fill a space and the relationship between them size-wise. My studio is very small, so to see the work all together in the space, it was really the first time, and it was invigorating as it was informative. This piece, titled Map, makes plain the decision-making in my really intense sort of focus on edges. I do see this as an actual path or a map that you can follow in the aerial sense, seeing where the grain shifts, where paper has been flipped over to reveal only the bleed through of the ink and not the ink surface itself, and to navigate color and its reverberations. I am endlessly fascinated and driven by visual problems and how to wrestle with the surface. Decisions on Brightness is in the gallery right now and is another example of this meditation on opacity and the decision-making on how to move back and forth in space until the piece reaches a conclusion of sorts. In these works, Veil, The Invitation, Fire Blanket, and Cloud Path, I am more closely speaking to and about the landscape and using color in tandem with texture and layers to evoke a familiar but uncanny place that feels a bit strange. Just as my small and more intimate collages have led to more labored over and formal woodblock prints like the last several, I've been showing the same compositional strategies that I'm using here in these larger prints have also led to much larger surfaces in my murals and public artwork. I teach the mural art course here at North, where we learn together about public art commissions, developing proposals, and installing work on a grand scale. And this is part of my future scheming for my artwork. I do want to take on more public art projects, as working outdoors and in the community is something I both love and believe in. A few of you in this room today helped to make this project happen on the construction fence lining the Roosevelt Light Rail Station. So this is an idea of scale. I used an in-studio collage of my printed debris to make the model for this mural and then translated it to a space over 90 feet long. Making public artwork cannot be done in isolation, and it always requires a team. This detail from the same mural alone is over 20 feet tall and wide and made from several sheets of plywood. It's so invigorating to work on this scale and to work amidst the public, where you get questions and critiques and comments and unsolicited and solicited advice and distractions and help. It is a level of vulnerability and engagement with the viewer that feels really rare. And here we are at North last spring, painting the design of wonderful artist Paige Pettibon on campus. And I hope you will all get a chance to see this if you haven't already. Another aspect of my practice that runs parallel to my making is curation. For me, curation really feels like a creative necessity. I think this goes back to this river of influence that I'm always drinking from. and a desire to bring these influences of mine together in one space, to learn from and to highlight and to make platforms for artists who are making things I have such love for. Sometimes these are exhibitions, and other times they're print exchanges that happen via the mail. This shot is from a book art show I curated back in 2010 when I had first moved back to the area from grad school, and I really didn't know a soul in the Seattle art world. It was in this lovely house-turned gallery in Burien. I've also had 2 chances to co-curate with Amanda in our campus gallery. This show called Textualization was in 2014 and focused on art using text as a visual and conceptual device. And the ZAP show, the Zine Archive Publishing Project, which we organized in partnership with the Seattle Public Library, who now houses this expansive library of zines. Last spring, I co-curated a show with my friend and colleague, Paula Rebsam, at Soil Gallery called Always On, Art and Motherhood. The show asked mothers of young children who were also working jobs outside of their studio and parenting to offer more raw and in-between work they make when they aren't necessarily making the work they want to be making. The entire premise of this show centered this in-between space, the idea that even though each of these artists are prolific and known in their own right for their impressive studio practices, there is still this wellspring of ideas that won't have time to be made, and that it's also important, but maybe more strange and tender work that results from their identities as caregivers of young children, working while making and making while working. This exhibition was really something to celebrate and see as the collective gestures of artists seen in the same space always has a way of truth-telling. This slide's for Amanda. My contributions to this show were indeed small, and many were temporary. I wanted to make these same small moments that happen in my basement studio and bring them into the gallery space as a way of proving that the work we make during the hardest times of our lives is interesting work for the very context in which the artist fought to make it. And I will end with this slide, a sketch of my daughter Inez sleeping, and a documentation of a studio drawing on scrap paper, waxed and ironed and almost falling apart, but held in a way that feels powerful, a protest sign, if you will, claiming this small act of making as enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelda. That was amazing. I wanted to read a couple questions. The first one comes from Melissa Grinley. I'm curious how a project receives the term failed.
So any number of reasons, but in this particular one, I was really excited. I love making zines and artist books, and I really love sort of ephemera or like work that you can pass out and sort of get into the hands of more people. And I found this way to make an actual magazine like for cheap, where you could just use your own images, but it would be on like magazine paper. And my whole plan was to edition it and just like pass it out to everyone. And I got it back, and like the color was just awful. Like it was really muted. There was only like a couple images had the clarity that needed. So even though I had previewed it and everything, I had 50 of these magazines that I was not going to give to anybody. So what resulted is I took the pages out that worked, and I've made several projects from them, and I'm still mining that material. So, you know, I think what makes a project fail is just sometimes it doesn't look good, and it also doesn't get the message you want across, but I definitely keep it, and it'll make its way into other work for sure.
And that's an interesting thing as an artist, is like you put things in that you don't necessarily love to a show or something, and those are the things that other people, you know, are drawn to. So it's just a really interesting concept. Thank you for bringing that up, Melissa. Like what is failed to you, you know, it's going to be real specific. Paula just made a little comment, which when you were talking about sounds like motherhood too, making everything work together and keeping it mysterious at the same time. Quote.
That's perfect. Yes.
Yeah. We can get to the point of talking live, but Shannon says, do you ever think that you work in these temporary collages as a way to not fully commit to a composition, a way to be able to keep using ephemera you are especially attached to again and again? I sometimes have a hard time with this and feel a slight sense of loss when I have officially glued something down.
Yeah, there are those scraps that you'll never be able to recreate it in the way there's a little bit of magic. And I think that that's kind of the aura that I'm talking about, is that one little texture or way that mark or way that color could bind on that scrap paper, it cannot be reproduced. And it is something that you've given so much, you put so much of your love and gratitude towards, like, this tiny paper, that to really put it down and commit to it and sort of send it off feels like a loss. I can relate to that.
Nice. There's some really lovely things in here. I'm not sure I'm going to get to all of them. Just a lot of love. Are all collage materials self-made?
Yeah, for the most part. It's the exception if they're not self-made. Like, I made a whole series that was in the show at Jay Reinhardt that was based off of this old newsprint paper that I got from my father and mother-in-law's house. We had to move them out of their house during the pandemic that they had lived in for decades. And, he really kept a lot of things. And, but this paper was so beautiful. It was just newsprint, meant to be very sort of one-off and disposed of, but it had just retained this deep, gorgeous, like I call it fawn color. It was so lovely in that blue, that very specific blue ink that lined paper has, and just stacks of it. And I was so in love with it. I've tried to create that exact color myself and I couldn't. And so when I do incorporate found work, it's usually like the connection is pretty deep with it, or there's a narrative that I'm interested in exploring more. But I also feel like it was like the Moleskine journals in a way, like just this really direct connection between note-taking and journaling and like marking your way through the world in a casual sense, but also seeing that as enough, right? Seeing that gesture is actually pretty profound.
Johanna says, yeah, just curious if you've ever integrated physical collage with digital assemblage.
Oh, yeah. Well, there was once upon a time I had access to this lovely big Epson printer, like large format printer. And then I was doing a lot more digital work and printing it there and using photographic work or digital manipulations and then collaging on top of it. And I haven't had access to that in, now like 13 years or something. So that's something I think about too, is really trying to bring some of that back. I do a lot of solvent transfers and other ways to get the digital imagery that I'm interested happening, and pronto plate lithography is another way I use to make that happen. But I'm definitely more drawn to getting it on paper and then working with it that way.
Ling has a question. Well, first of all, loving everything about this talk. I'm curious, what does abstraction mean to you? Do you use it to hide or reveal, or both?
Oh, that's so good. I just want to sit with that question, and can I make that my answer? I use it to hide and to reveal, and both. I want to just steal that from Ling. I think I have an inclination toward the pictorial and like for landscape, and really trying to kind of puzzle the world back together. Like, here's horizon, here's sky, here's mountain, but I have a like repulsion towards the literal, right? I'm much more drawn to something that's more open and mysterious, and that's deeper. And so that's sort of always been, I think abstraction's been my like tool or my vessel to kind of sit in that caught between those two sort of inclinations. And so, yeah, it's like hiding sort of the fact that I'm really interested in just like reflecting what I see, but also that it reveals sort of more of this container of space that I was talking about that's like intangible, that I want to be visible. And I think abstraction is really so convenient for any artist to use and to think about, because it can mean so many things and it's so individualized really with the work. I don't know that I've ever really worked to define it. Sort of like book arts and artist books, it feels like it's a vessel, and when I turn left, like it's doing this other thing, and then when I turn right, it's serving me in the complete opposite way. This is why I use poets and people and authors to explain my thoughts better than I do. But
Kim asks, do your children ever have a direct brand in your work?
One of the direct ways that I've used their work is I'm like in love with the handwriting of like 4.5 to 5-year-olds. It's like now my 8-year-old's doing like this little like loopy loops and stuff. But when she was like 5 and 4.5, it was so interesting, like how she put together like font and the way that she would like structure her letters. I just wanted to capture it. So I did. I mean, the word brand makes me think of this example.
She meant hand.
Oh, hand. I thought you said brand.
Well, I did say brand, and she wrote brand, but she meant hand.
So I tried to like, there's a font making, I think it was Elijah actually told me about this, who's in this room, where you can like trace, you can put in your handwritten, like handcrafted font, and it will like alphabetize it and make it a font. So I've like tried to actually industrialize and capture her handwriting at this age. And now my younger daughter is also now getting into that stage, and it's I've used that for my font in my work anyway. They have also like there's this one drawing of a thundercloud and a lightning bolt that I've used several times in my work, and that's definitely their hand. But other than that, I try to keep them out of the studio. I mean, as cute as they are when they're like cheering me on, it's hard to get the headspace. I don't necessarily want them there.
Thank you. Linda Thomas said she saw this is like how I want to leave, just because. Saw the exhibition at the NSC gallery just this morning. Everybody try and see it before Friday. It's actually before Thursday at 4 p.m. Stunning work. Thank you to all the artists. Yeah, a really nice talk. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here between all the things that you're supposed to be doing at school. I know that that kind of is hard to get your head in the right place at the right time, and you're not, with me, I'm always lagging a little bit behind. So thank you for being here, and we will end this now.
Thank you so much.